Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Professor Irwin Horwitz, who recently made the news. He's a professor at A&M University in Texas because he had a real problem with a class and ended up giving an F to every student in the class. It became a huge controversy, and the question we have to look at today is what's really becoming of the United States higher education system. Professor, a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much. And just to clarify a little bit on that, I'm a professor at Texas A&M in Galveston. I'm not at the main campus. I'm at an extension campus of the main campus.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Tell us in brief, because for those people who, I can't imagine how anyone could have missed this important story, but if they did, give us a brief summary of what actually happened that led to this event of failing these students.
Okay, well, the course that I teach, strategic management, is the capstone course in our program where the people that are getting, majors in administration take this last class where they integrate everything that they've learned before. And then initially going over the review, of certain concepts with students before going into business strategy, had actually found that, almost half the class couldn't even do a break-even analysis, that they couldn't even tell you how many cups of Kool-Aid to sell at the end of the driveway, it takes to break even. And at that point, as I started, hitting home on a little of these issues and people didn't do too well on the midterm, there grew dissension and very bad behavior, began in the class, beginning with cheating and leading into, other such incidents as swearing at me, finding spit in my notes, and just a plethora of other such, behaviors, where it got to the point where I was convinced that on a competency level, many of them were not prepared, and on a professionalism level, when you added that to the equation, the whole group of them, I'm sure there may have been a few exceptions within that group, but basically that class and the way that direction of the class was going and the negativity, these people did not deserve to pass.
So is part of the grade that they get based on, A, the respect they show the professor, and B, their professionalism?
Well, part of my thinking is demonstrating professionalism. I do not grade them on being nice to me or not. I don't, it's look, I'd love it if all the kids I ever taught loved me, and that's just not the case. It's just, it's a bell curve of people that like you and don't like you, But with that said, I'm looking at their basic competency, and I'm seeing that these kids can't break even. But when you add to that exceptional behavior, not just unprofessional, but I mean spitting on somebody's notes, calling somebody, an F blank moron, and continued cheating behaviors. Even if there was an honor code and they just, one person admitted to breaking the honor code, 3 to 4 times in writing.
So
and you see this, and it's going on all around. At some point, it's not a matter of trying to discern, which are the 2 or the 3 good students in the class and just looking at the numbers on the paper, but it's just saying this is ultimately unacceptable, and, I drew a line in the sand.
And so ultimately what happened as the school year came to an end? These kids all had to go back and do the course again?
No, actually, what happened is that the school stepped in and changed my grade. About 85% of them walked with either an A or a B in the class.
So when you say the school changed the grade, that means that they retested them and they took responsibility for this grade?
Well, no, they sort of retested it. They never retested, for example, break-even analysis. I mean, given that almost half the class failed, you would think that they would try to see if the kids had learned to break even. If they, they said that they were going to have tutoring, they didn't. And in fact, on the final examination, it covered nothing that I covered in class. It was rather, taking questions from the textbooks and having the kids look it up, because after I got done teaching the class, they did presentations and whatnot. On the presentations that I did grade, and actually 2 of them weren't badly graded. One got a very low grade. They went back, and especially on that one with the low grade, where it's asking them how, what they thought of the presentation and so on and so forth. They scratched out my grades, put in their own grades for each one of those with they didn't see the presentation. You can't grade a presentation you haven't seen. And then with that presentation, when I gave my grade, I accompanied it with a full one-page analysis of, why they got the grade that they did and what they did wrong. And, they were very off. But typically, I should say that, I've taught probably, 200 classes before this particular class, and I've never come close to failing a whole class. And in fact, it's fairly rare that I fail individuals at all.
Wow. We're talking with Professor Irwin Horwitz from Texas A&M University in Galveston, who made the news recently because his whole class was really quite troublesome that he ended up having to fail everyone in the class. He's given us a brief summary of what happened. Professor, now I'd like to sort of expand the story because, quite frankly, reading your story and the stories of many teachers and professors around the country, I have become a huge pessimist on the U.S. education system and where this is really leading, because I want to note that the Goldstein on Gelt show is a financial show. We're always looking for where to invest. And I'm thinking if the fundamental core of the educational system has zero integrity, the way you're describing it, if I'm a long-term investor, am I really right to be investing in America?
Wow. Well, I'm not one to give investment advice, but I'll say this, that America, in terms of, its scholastic rankings, depending on which measure you look at. For example, the gold standard is considered the PISA test, the Program for International Student Assessment. And we came in number 36 out of 60. I mean, we have declined, on every educational measure, relative to other countries worldwide, over the last decade or so, significantly. We're far from number one. So, I think that your concerns about, are the talent in our population, and there are some very talented individuals, but you're concerned about education and what's really happening in this generation is very well-founded. I mean, I certainly would say that I have my doubts, too.
Well, how long have you been teaching?
I've been teaching a total of roughly about 20 years.
Okay, so over those 20 years, now you're teaching strategic management. One of the most important things, I think, about being successful in any business is being able to be strategic and look at the big picture. So how would you say that the trend has been over the past 2 decades of your teaching in terms of the quality of the students and the confidence you have in their ability to be future leaders?
Well, I'll say this, that I haven't just taught business students. A lot of my teaching has been in the public health thing. I taught a lot of, for example, surgeons at the Baylor College of Medicine, actually surgical residents. I taught a lot of physicians, physician assistants, nurses over at the University of Texas School of Public Health, and so I have dealt with different populations than this undergraduate population. I've taught undergraduate before, but from when I taught undergraduate before, which was about 10 years ago, to now, the difference is night and day.
All right, that's a little depressing. So let me.
I personally, I would not have hired anybody from this class that just graduated.
Right.
It's a really sad thing for me to say.
So I'd like to try to understand the cause a little bit. One of the things that some pundits like to tell you is that the problems, maybe more the political issues like the riots we see in Baltimore, the Arab Spring, this kind of thing, are all as a result of extreme poverty. And that leads to a lack of manners and a lack of honor. Is that, I mean, you don't have to comment on that side of it, but are you dealing with people who are suffering from such extreme poverty that the only way that they have to express themselves is through lack of respect, to say the least?
Yes, I think, it used to be in academia that when first of all, you'd be worried about whether or not everybody would get to college, that you would be worried in high school that you did well enough to get accepted by a college. And then when you were accepted in college, the idea was to earn a degree, not to get a degree or to buy a degree. And this mindset has now shifted away, because when you would graduate, you would be a quote-unquote educated person. That doesn't mean an expert when you had a bachelor's degree in any area, but that you would be, a civilized person, that you would, have some appreciation for the arts, you would have some appreciation of some knowledge of geography, some knowledge of politics, some basic competencies. Now it's all about buying that piece of paper. And as far as the Arab Spring, as far as what you're seeing in Baltimore, is it a result of education or poverty? And I would say that's a chicken and egg problem. I mean, one feeds into another. You have poverty, and so you have very poor schools, and then the schools are poor, which in turn leads to a cycle of poverty. So it's the cause and effect at this point is it's just one big circle.
So if you were the Minister of Education, and I'm going to make this the last question, or the Dean of the university, and you wanted to solve this problem, is there a quick fix, or is there something that's going to take decades in order to bring people back up to the standards that maybe we knew 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Well, there's not going to be a quick fix, but I would say that there are two things that are necessary. Number one, it's necessary to do what I do, and that is flunk those students that don't do the performance that's expected for the degree. Bring the integrity back to the degrees in universities, and not just hand out all A's, and make it a business-based, customer-based, where the student's a customer and pays the money and pay your fees, get your B's. So that's one thing that has to happen. The second is that parents need to step in. Parents need to stand up and say, when, for example, the one student who swore, one of their parents came to defend the student, saying, my child would never say anything like that. They weren't there. They can't defend the child. And chances are the child learned that language at home anyway. Mm-hmm. So the parents need to stop the entitlement. They themselves probably growing up at the end of the entitlement. This is what we're seeing, I think, is the second generation of entitlement. And I think what's coming down the pike, and what makes me very pessimistic, is the third generation of entitlement, I think, is going to be a doozy, because when, these kids that were spitting at me and hissing at me and cursing and making obscene phone calls to my house and all the like, and the cheating and the taking pictures of exams, and I can go on and on. When this, generation of students goes on and have their kids go into school, I think it's going to be a nightmare.
All right. On that note, Professor Irwin Horwitz, it's been quite interesting talking with you. We are certainly going to continue following the story, and we'll put a link. And I understand that, or hopefully, you'll have a website or more information out there, and we'll keep all that.
Yes, although people can get in touch with me. I'll give my email address.
Great.
And people could email me directly at Irwin, IRWIN _ Horwitz, HORWITZ, at yahoo.com.
Okay, and we will put a link to that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com, and we'll keep that updated in case anything new comes along. Professor Horwitz, it was a real pleasure having you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world. If you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.